If you came here to beg, Emily, you picked the wrong lobby. Richard Hale said it loud enough for the cameras to catch his smile and quiet enough to make it sound civilized. The glass doors of Hale and Rowe Manufacturing closed behind Emily Carter with a soft, expensive hush, sealing out the cold Cleveland rain and leaving her standing beneath a 30-foot silver logo she had helped turn from a sketch on a napkin into a name on the skyline. Her beige coat was damp at the shoulders. Her hair was pinned low. In one hand, she carried a plain black folder, the kind no one noticed until it was opened. The lobby smelled like polished marble, fresh coffee, and money pretending it had never been afraid. Around her, employees slowed without meaning to. A receptionist looked up, blinked once, and lowered her voice toward the security desk. That's his ex-wife. The words moved through the room without needing volume. Richard stood near the center of the lobby in a navy suit, one hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly at the waist of Vanessa Cole, the woman now photographed beside him at charity dinners, business luncheons, and every public moment where he needed the world to believe he had upgraded his life. Vanessa's cream-colored dress matched the marble floor. Her smile matched the room, cold, bright, and designed to reflect power. She tilted her head at Emily as if looking at a stain someone had missed. "Emily," Vanessa said, sweetly enough to cut. "I didn't realize former spouses were invited to shareholder events." A few people laughed under their breath. Not loudly. People like that rarely laughed loudly when they wanted to feel superior. They let the silence do it for them. Emily did not look at Vanessa. She looked past her, toward the elevator bank, where the digital clock above the brushed steel doors read 9:57. 3 minutes early. She had always been 3 minutes early. It was one of the habits Richard used to praise when they were broke, back when punctuality meant they might keep a vendor, save a contract, survive another month. Now he studied her coat, her simple heels, the small rain droplets clinging to her sleeve, and decided he understood the whole story. "You should have called my office," Richard said, stepping closer, lowering his voice but not his cruelty. "Whatever financial trouble you're in, this isn't the place." Emily finally looked at him. Not angrily, not sadly, just directly, the way someone looks at a locked door while already holding the key. For a second, Richard's smile flickered, because there was no desperation in her face. No apology, no trembling hope. Only a stillness he no longer recognized because he had mistaken it for weakness for too many years. Vanessa gave a small laugh and reached for the paper cup on the reception counter. "Can someone get her a visitor badge?" she asked. "Or maybe a chair. This might be emotional." The receptionist hesitated, badge printer glowing beside her hand. Security shifted near the wall. A junior executive pretended to check his phone while watching everything through the reflection in the glass. Emily set her black folder on the marble counter with care. The sound was soft, but Richard heard it. Everyone did. Then the elevator chimed. The center doors opened, and a silver-haired attorney in a charcoal suit stepped out, followed by 2 assistants carrying sealed document cases. He did not look at Richard first. He did not look at Vanessa. He walked straight to Emily, stopped beside her, and gave a respectful nod. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice calm enough to empty the room of laughter. "The board is ready for you." Richard's hand slipped from Vanessa's waist. Vanessa's smile stayed in place, but something behind it went still. Emily picked up her folder, smoothed one corner with her thumb, and turned toward the private elevator. Only then did she speak, her voice low, even, and impossible to misread. "Good. Let's not keep my company waiting." The private elevator rose without sound, but Emily could still feel the lobby beneath her, all those polished faces turning colder as the word company settled into the marble like a dropped match. Richard had not followed yet. He stood below with Vanessa and the cameras, trying to decide whether he had misheard her or whether the woman he had dismissed had walked into his building carrying something heavier than a request. Emily watched the numbers climb, 31, 32, 33, and for the first time in years, the reflection in the elevator doors did not look like a woman returning to an old wound. It looked like a woman returning to a construction site. Because before Hale and Rowe had glass walls and executive parking, before Richard wore tailored suits and spoke in practiced phrases about vision, there had been a freezing little workshop on the east side of Cleveland, 6 employees, 2 space heaters, and a coffee machine that worked only when someone hit it twice on the left side. Emily remembered the smell of metal dust on Richard's jacket when he came home after midnight, remembered the stack of unpaid invoices on their kitchen table, remembered writing vendor checks with one hand while stirring boxed macaroni and cheese with the other. She had not minded the struggle then. Struggle felt honest when both people carried it. Richard would sit across from her in his work boots, rubbing his tired eyes, promising that when the company made it, everyone would know she was the reason the lights stayed on. Emily believed him because his hands were rough then, his voice humble, his dreams still small enough to fit between them. She built the first payroll system in a rented apartment with peeling paint and one window unit that rattled through every Ohio summer. She called suppliers from the hallway because the baby next door cried through thin walls. She caught tax errors before they became penalties. She found a cheaper shipping route that saved them $12,000 in one quarter. She kept copies of everything, not because she distrusted Richard, but because she respected the truth. Then the company grew. 10 employees became 40. 40 became 200. The workshop became a factory. The factory became a campus, and Richard began speaking about sacrifice as if he had invented it alone. At ribbon cuttings, Emily stood 3 steps behind him. In interviews, he called her supportive. At dinners, he called her practical, then boring, then too cautious, always with a smile that trained people not to hear the insult. The first time he introduced Vanessa at a charity event, Emily was wearing a navy dress she had bought on sale and shoes that pinched her heels. Richard stepped onto a small stage, lifted a champagne glass, and thanked his investors, his board, his leadership team, and Vanessa, the woman he said understood his future. Emily sat at table 7 with her hands folded in her lap, while someone near her whispered that she must have been good for the early years. The early years. As if loyalty had an expiration date. As if the foundation should be grateful after the penthouse forgot its name. The elevator slowed near the 38th floor. Marcus Whitman glanced at the folder in Emily's hand, but he did not speak. He knew better than to fill silence that had taken 10 years to earn. Emily smoothed the front of her coat, felt the small weight of the pen inside her pocket, and remembered the night Richard told her she would never understand real power. The doors opened to the boardroom corridor, bright, quiet, and waiting. Emily stepped out first. The corridor to the boardroom was lined with framed photographs Richard had chosen himself, each one telling the same careful story. Richard beside the governor. Richard beside the mayor. Richard in a hard hat at the factory expansion. Richard cutting the blue ribbon with his perfect smile and his left hand lifted just enough to hide the empty space where Emily had once stood. She passed those photographs slowly, not because they hurt her, but because she remembered what had been cropped out of them. In one picture, she had been just outside the frame, holding a stack of revised budgets against her chest while Richard shook hands with a senator. In another, she had been behind the camera, reminding him to thank the welders by name because people remembered respect longer than bonuses. Years later, the company newsletter would call that decade the era of visionary leadership. Emily knew better. Vision did not answer payroll emails at 2 in the morning. Vision did not sit on hold with lenders for 46 minutes while dinner went cold. Vision did not notice when a supplier charged twice for the same shipment. Those things had been hers. But the moment Richard became rich enough to rewrite the past, he began doing it sentence by sentence. The sharpest sentence came at the Lakeview Foundation Gala, 9 months before the divorce papers were signed. The ballroom had been warm with gold lights and quiet music, full of donors who measured kindness in tax deductions and applause. Emily had worn a navy dress and a pair of heels that left a red mark across one toe before the salad course arrived. She remembered Richard standing on the stage, looking polished, grateful, almost gentle under the spotlight. For one foolish second, she thought he might finally say her name. He thanked the board. He thanked his investors. He thanked the city of Cleveland for believing in American manufacturing. Then he turned toward Vanessa, seated 2 tables away in white silk, and called her the woman who understood the future he was building. The room clapped. Cameras flashed. Emily sat very still with her hands folded over a dinner napkin, feeling the entire table learn how much she was worth to him. Not enough to mention. Not enough to defend. Not enough to keep. Afterward, near the coat check, one of Richard's board members leaned toward her with a smile that smelled faintly of bourbon and peppermint. He said, "You must be proud, Emily." Some women are made for the early chapters. Richard heard it. He was close enough to hear every word. He only adjusted his cuff links and asked Vanessa whether the valet had brought the car around. That was the night Emily stopped asking him to see her. 2 weeks later, Richard told her she was too cautious, too emotional about old debts, too attached to how things used to be. He said the company needed a woman who could stand beside its future, not one who kept dragging him back to receipts and risk reports. Emily did not argue. She had learned that arguing with a man in love with his own reflection only made the mirror brighter. When the settlement came, his lawyers expected tears. Richard expected anger. Vanessa expected a scene. Emily gave them signatures. Clean, steady, quiet signatures. Then she packed one suitcase, took her old accounting notebooks, and left the house before sunrise. While Richard was still asleep under imported sheets he had not known how to afford until she taught him how cash flow worked. Now, outside the 38th floor boardroom, Emily stopped before the final photograph. It showed Richard alone beneath the company logo, smiling like a man who believed ownership was the same thing as creation. Marcus waited beside the door. Emily touched the pen in her pocket, then looked at the handle. Behind that door were the people who had laughed softly when she disappeared. They were about to learn the difference between being erased and being underestimated. Before Marcus opened the boardroom door, Emily let one breath pass through her like cold air through an empty house. And in that breath she returned to the morning after she left Richard. There had been no dramatic exit, no slammed door, no speech on the front steps for neighbors to hear. Just a gray Ohio dawn, one suitcase, 2 cardboard boxes, and her old sedan parked under a maple tree that had already dropped half its leaves. She drove 47 miles before she pulled into a gas station outside Akron, bought burnt coffee in a paper cup, and sat behind the wheel with both hands wrapped around it because the warmth gave her something to hold. The settlement money Richard's lawyers thought would keep her quiet sat untouched in a separate account. Emily did not want a life built from his pity. She wanted one built from her own hands. Her first apartment after the divorce was 680 square feet above a laundromat, with pipes that clicked at midnight and a kitchen window facing the back of another brick building. Every morning, before the city fully woke up, she made coffee on a scratched counter, tied her hair back, and opened spreadsheets until the numbers stopped feeling like wounds and started becoming maps. She took contract work first, then a junior analyst position at a restructuring firm where most people assumed she was someone's assistant until she corrected them with calm precision. She did not announce her past. She did not post inspirational quotes. She did not explain that the company they praised in business magazines had survived its early years because she had learned how to stretch $8,000 across payroll, rent, insurance, and hope. Instead, she studied debt schedules, asset liens, covenant breaches, convertible notes, quiet instruments with sharp edges. She learned that power did not always walk into a room wearing confidence. Sometimes it arrived as Clause 12.4 on page 73 of a loan agreement. Sometimes it sat hidden in a minority position until the wrong chief executive officer missed one payment too many. At lunch, while others talked about weekend houses and ski trips to Colorado, Emily ate soup from home and marked up case studies with a blue pen. At night, the laundromat machines hummed beneath her floor while she built models until her eyes burned. She learned to read a balance sheet the way some people read weather, finding storms before the clouds formed. And slowly, her silence changed shape. It was no longer the silence of a woman swallowing humiliation at a gala table. It became the silence of a woman measuring distance, gathering proof, waiting for the exact inch where dignity could become leverage. 2 years passed, then 3. Her name began appearing on internal memos. Partners started asking for her opinion before final calls with lenders. A private equity group brought her into a failing logistics deal, and she saved 800 jobs by separating bad leadership from good operations. That was when Carter Meridian Capital called. They did not offer sympathy. They offered a seat. Emily took it. She bought 2 new suits, kept the old blue pen, and moved into an office with a view of Lake Erie, where the water looked calm only from far away. On her first day, she placed a framed photograph on her desk, not of Richard, not of the old house, not even of Hale and Rowe. It was a picture of the original workshop, taken before the ribbon cuttings and the speeches, when the sign outside was crooked and the future still required both of them to lift. She kept it there as a reminder, not of what she had lost, of what she knew how to build. The Hale and Rowe file arrived on a Tuesday morning in a gray binder with no drama at all, placed on Emily's desk between a cup of coffee and a stack of lender updates from a paper mill in Wisconsin. Carter Meridian Capital had been reviewing distressed manufacturing assets across the Midwest, and at first, the name on the cover looked like a mistake made by an assistant who did not know her history. Emily did not touch it for almost a full minute. Outside her office window, Lake Erie lay under a sheet of pale winter light, still and colorless, as if the whole city was holding its breath with her. Then she opened the binder. The first page was clean. The second was careful. By the 10th, the truth had begun to bleed through the margins. Hale and Rowe was not thriving. It was performing. Richard had borrowed against future contracts that had not fully materialized, delayed vendor payments while announcing expansion plans, and moved debt between subsidiaries like furniture rearranged before guests arrived. On television, he still spoke about confidence. On paper, the company was running out of floor beneath its polished shoes. Emily read until the coffee went cold. She recognized old patterns beneath the new language, the same impatience Richard used to mistake for courage, the same arrogance dressed up as vision. Years earlier, when she warned him against taking a risky supplier advance from a firm in Pennsylvania, he had laughed and called her too careful. Now that same structure appeared in the binder, larger, uglier, wrapped in legal phrasing that could not hide the weakness underneath. One missed covenant here. One short-term bridge loan there. A payroll reserve thinner than it should have been for a company employing more than 900 people across Ohio and Indiana. Emily did not smile. This was not the kind of discovery that made a decent person celebrate. Behind every bad decision Richard had made were people who clocked in before sunrise, packed lunches in foil, paid mortgages, coached Little League, and trusted that the man on the company posters knew what he was doing. She closed the binder once, then opened it again. Not because she doubted the numbers, but because she needed to be certain her hands were steady for the right reason. Revenge would have rushed. Pride would have called Richard immediately just to hear fear in his voice. Emily did neither. She requested the loan agreements. She asked for lien searches. She pulled property records, contract summaries, board minutes, and insurance schedules. By Friday, the conference table in her office was covered with paper, each page weighted by a small brass clip, each figure circled in blue ink. Marcus Whitman joined her that evening with his sleeves rolled to the forearms and 2 legal pads under one arm. He looked at the spread of documents, then at Emily. He did not ask whether she could handle it. That was why she trusted him. He only said, "The senior debt is vulnerable if the bridge lender sells." Emily nodded. Her finger rested on a conversion clause buried deep in the agreement, quiet as a loaded elevator waiting behind closed doors. If Carter Meridian bought the debt, they would not just become a creditor. Under the right default conditions, they could control the restructuring, replace management temporarily, and protect the operating assets before Richard dragged the company into a public collapse. Emily looked at the old workshop photograph on her desk, the crooked sign, the cheap gravel lot, the beginning no one had been able to erase from her memory. She was not looking at Richard anymore. She was looking at the factory lights, the payroll, the workers, the thing she had helped build before his ego put a glass tower around it. By the time the city lights came on, Emily had made her decision. She would not expose him. She would not beg him to listen. She would buy the part of the truth he had borrowed against and walk it straight back into the room where everyone thought she had disappeared. The purchase took 6 weeks, and Emily moved through each day as if she were crossing a frozen lake, listening for every small crack beneath the surface. Carter Meridian Capital bought the first note quietly through an affiliate in Delaware, then the second through a lender Richard had ignored for too long because the amount seemed too small to fear. Marcus handled the calls with the patience of a man who knew powerful things did not need to announce themselves. Emily handled the numbers. She checked every figure twice, then a third time after midnight, when the office had gone dark and the cleaning crew moved like shadows beyond the glass walls. There were moments when a younger version of her might have wanted Richard to know. She could imagine the phone call, the pause after she said her name, the way his confidence would search for a place to stand. But that would have made him the center of the story again. and Emily had spent too many years giving him rooms he had not earned. So she kept the circle small. No press, no rumors, no anonymous leaks to business columns. When one associate suggested they could let the market hear whispers and force Richard into panic, Emily looked up from the loan schedule and said, "We are not here to humiliate him. We are here to preserve the asset." The associate never suggested it again. By the end of the 5th week, Carter Meridian held the controlling debt position, the conversion rights were confirmed, and Hale and Rowe had crossed the default threshold Richard had promised his board he would avoid. The company was still smiling in public. Its social media pages showed factory tours, leadership breakfasts, and Vanessa beside Richard at a rooftop fundraiser in downtown Cleveland, her hand resting lightly on his arm while he spoke about legacy. Emily saw the photograph on a Monday evening while waiting for Marcus to finish reviewing the final notice package. She looked at it for less than 5 seconds, then turned her phone face down. Legacy. The word felt different when you had carried the foundation and watched someone else engrave his name above the door. That Friday, Marcus delivered the formal request for an emergency board meeting. The notice was professional, restrained, almost boring. It cited debt acquisition, covenant failure, restructuring rights, and interim governance authority. It did not mention Emily Carter until the final line, where her name appeared as managing partner of the acquisition vehicle. Richard did not read that line carefully. Emily knew because his assistant accepted the meeting within 7 minutes, and the agenda response treated Carter Meridian like a stranger. With money, not a woman he had once told to stop worrying about paperwork. On the morning of the meeting, Emily stood in her apartment before sunrise while Cleveland was still the color of wet stone. She chose the black dress first, then changed into a dark slate suit because the day was not about beauty. It was about clarity. She pinned her hair low, placed her old blue pin in her inner pocket, and lifted the black folder from her desk. Inside were copies of the debt purchase confirmations, the board resolution drafts, and one photograph of the original workshop, folded once so only she could see it. Before leaving, she paused at the mirror near the door. There was no victory in her expression, no anger polished into performance, no wounded woman returning for applause. There was only readiness. The kind that came after years of being underestimated by people who mistook quiet for empty. Now, as she stood outside the 38th floor boardroom with Marcus beside her and Richard still catching up from the lobby below, Emily heard movement behind the door. Chairs shifting, papers turning, men clearing their throats as if authority lived in sound. Marcus touched the handle and glanced at her. Emily nodded once. When the door opened, every face at the long walnut table turned toward the woman they had spent years forgetting. The boardroom held its silence for one clean second before it began protecting itself. 12 chairs surrounded the long walnut table, and almost every one of them had once belonged to someone who had smiled at Emily as if kindness were a favor they could afford. Now those same faces searched for a category to place her in. Former wife, accounting woman, settlement problem, personal complication, anything but the reason the emergency meeting existed. A director named Paul Mercer, silver tie perfectly centered, rose halfway from his chair and looked past Emily toward Marcus. "Counsel, I believe there may be some confusion," he said. "This is a restricted board session." Marcus set his document case on the table with both hands, the small click of the latches landing harder than the sentence. Emily did not move toward the head chair. Not yet. She stood beside the door in her slate suit, rain still darkening one edge of her coat, black folder held against her side, and let the room reveal itself. At the far end, a woman from the audit committee glanced at Emily, then down at the agenda, then back again. She had seen the name Carter Meridian Capital, but not connected it to the Carter standing in front of her. People often separated women from their own names when a man had once owned the story around them. "Emily." Paul tried again, softening his voice the way executives did when they wanted dismissal to sound humane. "This may not be the best time. Richard will be here shortly." "I know," Emily said. "That is why I am early." A chair shifted. Someone cleared his throat. The city spread behind the windows in gray morning layers. Lake Erie in the distance, the factory district below, the old bones of Cleveland holding up another polished room where truth had been delayed too long. Then the boardroom door opened behind her, and Richard entered with Vanessa half a step at his side. He had recovered his lobby smile, but it was tighter now, fastened to his face like something borrowed. "I apologize for the interruption," he said to the board, not looking at Emily first. "This is a personal matter that seems to have found its way upstairs." Vanessa stepped in with him, her perfume arriving before her words. She looked at the empty chair along the side wall and gave Emily a small, public smile. "There is a seat for visitors, I think." The insult was elegant enough to pass through expensive carpet without leaving a mark. A few eyes lowered. No one laughed this time, but no one defended Emily either. Richard walked to the head of the table and placed both hands on the back of his chair. "Emily, whatever this is, we can discuss it later. This company has serious business to handle today." Emily looked at his hands on the chair he believed belonged to him because no one had yet asked him to stand up from it. She remembered those same hands signing vendor guarantees she had warned him about, remembered them waving away her risk reports, remembered them resting beside Vanessa at the gala while her own name disappeared from his speech. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough to make the room lean toward it. "You are right, Richard. This company does have serious business to handle today." Marcus opened the first document case. The sound traveled across the table like a curtain being drawn. He placed 3 sealed packets before the directors, each labeled with the Carter Meridian name. Richard stared at the label. His expression did not break, but it thinned. Vanessa saw it first, that hairline fracture in his certainty, and her smile began to lose its shape. Paul Mercer reached for the nearest packet, then hesitated, as if paper could burn. Emily finally moved. She walked the length of the table slowly, not toward the side wall, not toward the visitor chair, but toward the empty seat beside Marcus at the center of the room. Each step was measured. Each face followed her. When she reached the chair, Marcus pulled it back for her with calm respect. Then he turned to the board and said, "Ms. Carter will be leading this meeting on behalf of the controlling creditor group." Richard gave a short, disbelieving laugh that died almost immediately. "That is not possible." Emily sat down, placed her black folder on the table, and looked at him as if he had finally arrived at the correct page. "It is possible," she said. "You just never read carefully enough." The room did not explode. That would have been too simple. Instead, the boardroom went unnaturally quiet, the way a house goes quiet when every person inside has heard the same window crack. Marcus distributed the packets one by one, sliding them across the walnut table with the care of a man setting down final weather reports before a storm. Richard did not open his copy at first. He stared at Emily as if the force of his disbelief could rewrite the documents before him. "Controlling creditor group," he repeated, each word stiff and unfamiliar in his mouth. "Emily, you do not know what you are doing." Emily reached into her black folder and removed a single sheet. She placed it flat in front of her, aligning its bottom edge with the table as calmly as if she were preparing a grocery list. "You said the same thing. In 2014, when I told you the Pennsylvania supplier advance would become a liquidity trap." Richard's face tightened. Paul Mercer opened his packet. The audit chair opened hers. Paper began to move around the room. Faster now, no longer ceremonial. Vanessa stayed near the door, one hand resting on the back of an empty chair, her polished expression thinning with each turned page. Marcus spoke with quiet precision. Carter Meridian Capital, through its affiliates, had acquired 63% of Hale and Rose Sr. secured obligations. The company had breached its debt covenants 14 days earlier. Under the conversion and restructuring provisions, Carter Meridian held authority to initiate interim governance measures, appoint restructuring oversight, and bring all major executive decisions under review pending board ratification. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They filled the room with a weight no insult could survive. Richard finally opened his packet. Emily watched his eyes move across the first page, then stop at the signature block. He looked once, then again, then a third time, slower, as if her name had become a locked door he had never noticed in his own house. Emily Carter, managing partner, Carter Meridian Capital Special Situations. His hand shifted on the paper, flattening it too hard. "This is a technical position," he said, turning toward the board. "A creditor does not run my company." "No," Emily said softly. "A responsible creditor protects one when management no longer can." The audit chair lowered her eyes. Paul Mercer's mouth opened, then closed. Across the table, another director adjusted his glasses and read the covenant summary again. but the room had already understood. Richard was not being embarrassed by gossip, betrayal, or emotion. He was being cornered by the one thing he had spent years dismissing: paperwork, exact dates, clauses he had signed, warnings he had ignored, numbers that refused to flatter him. Emily turned to the next page. Effective immediately, Carter Meridian is requesting a temporary suspension of discretionary executive spending, a freeze on non-essential public relations commitments, full access to cash management records, and an independent review of all related party transactions from the last 24 months. Vanessa looked up sharply at that phrase. Related party transactions. For the first time all morning, her confidence slipped into something almost practical. "Richard," she said quietly, but he did not answer her. He was still looking at Emily, still searching her face for the woman who had once asked him to listen. She was not there anymore. In her place sat someone he had trained by underestimating, someone who had learned his weaknesses without needing to raise her voice. "You planned this," he said. Emily looked at the old workshop photograph folded inside her folder, then back at him. "No, Richard. You planned this. I only read what you left behind." Marcus placed the final document at the center of the table. It was the interim control resolution. The board stared at it as if it had lowered the temperature by 10 degrees. Emily uncapped her blue pen. Emily signed first. The blue ink crossed the page with a calm line. Not rushed, not trembling, just final. Around the walnut table, no one spoke until Marcus slid the resolution toward Paul Mercer. The old board member looked at Richard once, perhaps searching for the man from the photographs in the hallway, the man who had made confidence sound like competence. Richard did not look back. His eyes were fixed on Emily's signature, on the name he had once reduced to a footnote and now could not move without. One by one, the directors added their names. The audit chair signed with a breath she tried to hide. Another director removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose before writing. Paper moved. Pens clicked. The room changed ownership without a raised voice. When the final signature was complete, Marcus gathered the pages and placed them in front of Emily. "The interim resolution is adopted," he said. "Effective immediately." Richard's chair made a low sound against the carpet as he stood. For a moment, he seemed taller only because everyone else had gone still. "You are making a mistake," he said, but the sentence had lost its authority before it reached the end. Emily closed the folder. The mistake was letting Pride manage payroll. Vanessa's hand slipped from the chair back. The diamond on her finger caught a stripe of gray daylight, bright and useless. She looked from Richard to the documents, then to the board, realizing that charm had no voting rights and appearances could not cover a covenant breach. She did not say goodbye. She only stepped toward the door, quieter than she had entered, and left Richard standing beside the chair he no longer controlled. Emily turned to the board. "No layoffs will be announced today. Factory operations will continue. Vendor payments will be reviewed by priority. Executive travel, luxury events, and non-essential public relations spending are suspended until the audit is complete." The audit chair looked up, surprised. "You are keeping the plants open?" Emily's eyes moved toward the window, toward the industrial blocks far below, where real people worked under fluorescent lights and trusted names on checks more than names on buildings. That is what should have been protected first. For the first time all morning, the silence in the room did not feel cruel. It felt awake. Richard walked to the far window, his reflection layered over the skyline he had spent years claiming as proof of himself. Was this revenge? He asked, without turning around. Emily stood, placing the old workshop photograph on top of the closed folder. The crooked sign, the gravel lot, the small beginning. The board saw it. So did Richard, when he finally looked back. "No," Emily said. "Revenge would have needed you. This was about saving what you were willing to ruin." She picked up the photograph and slipped it back inside the folder. Marcus opened the boardroom door. Beyond it, the corridor photographs still showed Richard smiling alone, but now they looked less like history and more like evidence of how carefully a story could be framed. Emily walked past them without slowing. Downstairs, the lobby had changed. The receptionist who had whispered about her now stood straighter. Security looked away first. The cameras were gone. The marble was still cold, the silver logo still high above the floor, but the room no longer owned her memory. Richard appeared at the balcony rail above, pale beneath the glass light. Watching as she crossed the lobby, he thought she had entered to beg. Emily did not look up. She stepped through the revolving doors into the clear Cleveland afternoon, her coat lifting slightly in the wind, her black folder held close, and behind her, for the first time in years, Hale and Roe belonged to the truth.